The Roman era prided itself on the law and order established during the Great Pax Romana. And yet, in the dark corners where imperial authority could not reach, others stepped in to establish their own system of rule. This underworld of antiquity is all too often overlooked in traditional studies of the past. So today, let us seek to explore the mysterious yet powerful gangs of Rome. While the gangs of Rome may have had to fight it out in the streets to lay claim to their turf, you won't have to struggle thanks to our sponsor, Established Titles. They offer you the chance to be awarded with a certificate for at least 1 square foot of land in Scotland. Following Scottish custom, such landowners are referred to as lords and ladies, and you can be too. The certificate comes with a unique plot number to locate your new holdings. This makes for a fun and unique gift, which even comes as a couples pack with adjoining plots. But what's even better is that Established Titles also helps preserve the natural woodlands of Scotland while helping global reforestation efforts. They plant a tree with every order and work with global charities such as One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future. Overall, it's a fun and novel way to support a worthy cause, and I highly recommend it. I've now officially got my own lordship of Invicta, and the first 200 people to purchase a title pack using my link can join me in the growing kingdom of Invicta. What's more, Established Titles is actually running a massive sale right now, and by using my code, Invicta10, you get an additional 10% off. So go to establishedtitles.com/Invicta10 to get your gifts now and help support the channel. Enjoy! But before we explore the underworld of antiquity, it's important that we understand what lies on the surface. And by this, I mean the official ways in which law and order was established in the Roman Empire. This is a complex subject, which we've covered in depth in another series if you want to learn more. At a high level, the Romans had a framework similar to ours, in that they had a legislative system for creating laws, a judicial system for interpreting the law, and an executive system for enforcing the law. These matured gradually over the centuries to reflect the needs of a growing population whose common citizens fought constantly for greater political equity with their elite. For context, let's examine a snapshot of this system around the mid-Republic. At this point, the legislative system involved laws being proposed and voted upon within the popular assemblies. If passed, these would be blessed by the Senate and officially inscribed on tablets to join the body of existing laws. The judicial system, meanwhile, involved courts where cases could be heard and verdicts reached. These had initially begun as popular courts run by tribunes and attended to by the entire city, but would later evolve into the more efficient jury courts run by judges and a panel of around 100 citizens. And finally, the executive system, meant to enforce the laws, was not some centralized department of justice, but rather a hodgepodge assortment of magistrates and their subordinates, which maintained order within various spheres of activity. What united their aims was a duty to defend the res publica and see that it came to no harm. It's important to note that this meant the executive branch was first and foremost concerned with the preservation of the city and the overall body politic, rather than the protection of individuals from unjust or illegal action. While impressive for its time, Rome's system of law and order had several glaring issues. 1. The body of laws was incredibly complex, with many holes and contradictions. 2. The judicial system was swamped with cases, and those which were heard lacked many of the safeguards necessary to ensure impartial justice. And 3. Law enforcement was poorly organized, with very limited resources when it came to the needs of the individual. Such a system was only capable of maintaining law and order from a high level. Local authorities could at times be leveraged to extend imperial authority down a bit further, but for the most part, they were too limited in their abilities. Thus it was that your everyday person on the ground was essentially on their own. But nature abhors a vacuum, and where official powers were missing, unofficial ones took their place. It is these unofficial powers which we will be exploring today. Owing to their very nature, they can be quite difficult to pin down. Broadly speaking, we might call them gangs. After all, the term gang is used to define a group with a defined leadership, an internal structure, a claim to territory, and the pursuit of illegal and/or violent behavior. This is broad enough to describe much of what we see developing in the power vacuums of ancient Rome. Similar to today, these came in all shapes and sizes. They ran the gauntlet from small-scale street gangs which might hustle the locals or take part in turf wars, to large crime syndicates which carried out the age-old operations of organized crime such as racketeering, bribery, insurance fraud, gambling, kidnapping, assassination, and more. And yet, A direct comparison to our gangs today could be somewhat misleading when you consider the nature of law and order we previously described, and the fact that violence in the past was simply more ubiquitous and acceptable. Therefore, in this video, we'll be using the term gangs rather loosely, and get more specific with their nature as we look closely at the unofficial organizations which formed within various realms of society. These include political gangs, religious gangs, economic gangs, sports gangs, and military gangs. In truth, gangs were rarely limited to one activity, but for our purposes, such simplifications are necessary to bring order to this complex subject. So with that in mind, let's get started. We can begin with the political gangs. Again, it will be useful to first describe the official power structures in this arena before we look at the unofficial ones. In this regard, Roman authority, or imperium, was distributed to its magistrates, each of whom was accorded a number of lictors proportional to their power. Such lictors acted not only as bodyguards, but were the muscle which could be used to enforce the law. This was particularly important within the city of Rome, where the boundary of the pomerium prohibited soldiers and even weapons from entering. The intent, therefore, was to monopolize the use of force in the hands of the government's agents. But another means of organizing political power in Rome was through the clientela. These were hierarchical social structures formed between patrons and their clients. Essentially, a powerful person would cultivate a semi-formal network of followers with favors being exchanged between the two. For instance, a patron could help support their clients with loans, business deals, legal representation, marriage arrangements, and more. In exchange, clients would offer loyalty and services to their patron. Likely, some of these favors might include doing the dirty work necessary to see that the wishes of their boss were accomplished. At times, this could be quite reminiscent of something from The Godfather. According to our records, patrons would host daily meetings in their home, which clients would attend to make their requests. In such events, the social hierarchy was readily apparent and likely reinforced by all manner of customs our records do not preserve, but which can easily be imagined. Following this, the patron would make their tour of the city with their clients in tow. The size of one's entourage was a reflection of one's power. Such clientela were often leveraged for political gain. They helped support a patron's political aspirations, voting for them and backing their campaign in any way possible. Given the fierce competition between Roman politicians, this adversity could ripple out to a clash of their clientela. By the time of the late Republic, these truly evolved into physical conflicts between political gangs. For instance, armed followers could be used to intimidate voters, break up meetings, and even directly threaten politicians. But wealthy individuals were not the only nucleus for social support groups. Another important organization was that of the collegium. These were essentially associations formed around shared interests such as a trade, profession, or religion. For instance, you might find the Millers Guild, the Union of Fishermen, or the Brothers of Mithra. Collegia were especially common in urban areas where they might come to dominate various parts of the city. Some were even organized like miniature governments with their own meeting halls from which to exert control over their particular area of interest. It should be no surprise then that the collegia could often find themselves getting involved in politics and sometimes even in violence. This was especially true in the late Republic, when gangs of clientela and collegia went to war in the streets of Rome. The most famous example of this was the clash between Claudius and Milo in the 50s BC. The former came from an ancient aristocratic family of patricians, but had renounced this lineage in a bid for power through a more populous career track that saw him ascend to the tribunate of the plebs. From here, he gained support from among the people and forged important ties with the various collegia of the city, recruiting backers from neighborhood to neighborhood. Soon, he would begin to arm and organize these groups into a militia-like force that could be deployed across the city against his political rivals. These would eventually be countered by Milo, a tribune of the Optimate faction who raised his own force of armed slaves, thugs, and hired gladiators. Cicero was caught in the crossfire and reports the following in a series of fascinating letters. Quote, "On the 11th of November, as I was going down the Via Sacra, he came after me with his men. Uproar, stones flying, cudgels and swords in evidence, and all like a bolt from the blue. I retired into Tetius Domio's forecourt, and my companions had no difficulty in keeping out the thugs. On November 12th, he tried to storm and burn Milo's house in the Kermalis, bringing out fellows with drawn swords and shields, and others with lighted firebrands, all in full view at 11 o'clock in the morning. He himself had made P. Sulla's house his assault base. Then, out came Q Flaccus, with some stout warriors from Milo's other house, the Aniana, and killed off the most notorious bandits of the whole Claudian gang. He had every wish to kill their principal, but he had gone to Earth in the recesses of Sulla's house. On November 19th, Milo went to the campus before midnight with a large following. Though Claudius had a picked force of runaway slaves at his back, he did not dare go to the campus. Milo stayed till noon, to the public's enormous glee and his own great reclaim. The campaign of the three brethren became a fiasco. They found their violence outmatched and their fury treated with contempt. This clash of gangs got so bad that many public activities in the city were disrupted, and elections for the year of 53 BC were even delayed not once but twice. The following year, things would come to an unexpected head. By sheer coincidence, both Claudius and Milo happened to pass one another whilst traveling in opposite directions along the Via Appia. Both gangs of about 30 men pass each other without incident until some unknown scuffle caused the last of their number to fall into dispute. This spark led to an immediate outbreak of violence. Apparently in the brawl, one of Milo's gladiators managed to throw a javelin which struck Claudius and prompted his men's retreat. These attempted to regroup at a nearby inn but were pursued. Claudius, unable to escape, was executed. Such was the bloody nature of Rome's political violence in this era. Eventually, Augustus would bring order to the chaos by keeping a tight leash on the collegia and other organizations of the city, whilst establishing the Praetorian Guard as his own keepers of the peace. Yet even still, political gangs would continue to play a role in the affairs of the empire. Another cause for alarm for the official powers of Rome were the religious gangs. Generally speaking, the Romans were quite tolerant of religions, with hundreds of gods and thousands of cults existing across the empire. Even foreign traditions were allowed to not only continue their practices, but were embraced by many within the city of Rome itself and in its legions. Certainly, this could be a cause for friction, but for the most part, the flexible, non-exclusive nature of a polytheistic world allowed for relative harmony within the bounds of Roman society. And yet, there were times in which the social fabric was ruptured to the point that the official powers of Rome were compelled to step in. We can begin with an example of small-scale disruption caused by a cult gang. These might arrive organically as people gravitated towards certain practices and began to form hierarchies. Priests or priestesses often led such groups, with various tiers of acolytes being established beneath them. Such organizations could easily begin to function like gangs which deployed violence to achieve their aims. A good example of this comes from the fictional but historically inspired work of Apuleius in The Golden Ass. In it, a group of priests devoted to the cult of Dea Syria wander around the countryside in outlandish garb, chanting away in a procession and performing bizarre acts of masochism. Eventually, this priestly procession comes upon a wealthy landowner's country home. Chaos ensues once the priests enter the property, set up, and begin chanting and playing music. The priests quickly begin tearing at themselves with their teeth in a frenzy and slashing themselves with double-edged knives. One of the adherents self-flagellates himself to the point that the floor becomes slippery with blood. Following this performance, the gang of bloody, weapon-wielding priests collects coins and large quantities of wine from their hosts before departing. It's easy to see how such altercations could go wrong, and how such groups might wield their power to nefarious ends. One of the most famous examples of this occurring at a large scale has to do with the cult of Bacchus. Introduced to Rome around 200 BC, it began as a new way to practice devotion to the god of wine and festivity. This specific cult was different, in that Livy describes the original teacher as a Greek of humble origin, versed in sacrifices and soothsaying, who had established a nocturnal version of prior traditions, added wine and feasting to the mix, and thus acquired an enthusiastic following of not just women, but men from across the classes. Initiation rites supposedly took place 5 days each month, with secret ceremonies known as the Bacchanalia being hosted over several nights. Here is how Livy puts it, quote, "To their religious performances were added the pleasures of wine and feasting to allure a great number of proselytes. When wine, lascivious discourse, night, and the intercourses of the sexes had extinguished every sentiment of modesty, then debaucheries of every kind began to be practiced, as every person found at hand that sort of enjoyment to which he was disposed by the passion predominant in his nature. Nor were they confined to one species of vice. Not only the promiscuous intercourse of freeborn men and women, but also from this storehouse of villainy proceeded false witnesses, counterfeit seals, false evidences, and pretended discoveries. From the same place, too, proceeded poison and secret murders, so that in some cases, not even the bodies could be found for burial. Many of their audacious deeds were brought about by treachery, but most of them by force, for it served to conceal the violence that on account of the loud shouting and the noise of the drums and cymbals, none of the cries uttered by the person suffering violence or murder could be heard abroad. The reason we hear about this otherwise secret cult is that a whistleblower came forth to the authorities. The scope of what was being alleged set off alarm bells. Supposedly, the cult was so numerous and organized that it was said to have become almost as a second state unto its own, with many adherents of men and women from noble families. In a speech to the people, a statesman warned that this cabal would soon be powerful enough to emerge from the shadows. Immediate action was needed. Guards were posted across the city, community watches were established, and the Senate ordered a consular investigation. These magistrates now began conducting interrogations, hunting priests, and cracking down on any who harbored fugitives. Livy claims that they would uncover a grand conspiracy in the very heart of Rome, whereby the leaders of the cult had broken civil, moral, and religious laws, and even compelled weak-minded followers to commit a string of murders undetected. In the end, some 7,000 members of the cult were arrested, the majority of which were executed. In the ensuing crackdown, the Senate passed a sweeping decree which dismantled the existing organization, required new groups to be heavily regulated, and reformed to the point that they would never again be able to attain the same level of power. The trauma of this incident shows why the emergence of later mystery cults, and in particular, the secretive, God-denying Christians, caused such a panic to the established powers in Rome. Now let's switch gears and pivot to the economic gangs of Rome. Broadly speaking, all gangs took part in some form of economic activity. However, I wanted to focus on specific groups which were formed around some economic function in society. Often, these came to exist as a result of the fact that many public services, as we would consider them today, were not actually run by the government. A great example relates to the threat of fires. This was an ever-present danger, especially in crowded cities, but no robust system yet existed to combat them. This is where some private entities swept in to exploit this lucrative market. Perhaps the most famous example is Crassus, who organized an army of slaves into a fire brigade. But rather than act benevolently, he would apparently refuse to save homes unless he was paid for the service or the owner sold him the property at a steeply discounted price. This could not stand. Eventually, steps were taken to establish government control of firefighting in the city of Rome, whilst a close eye was kept on other brigades which popped up across the empire. After all, any such consolidation of power could be considered a threat to local imperial authority. A pointed example of this is the following letter written by Emperor Trajan. Quote, "You have conceived the idea that a guild of firemen might be formed in Nicomedia on the model of various others already existing. But it is to be remembered that your province of Bithynia, and especially city-states like Nicomedia, are the prey of factions. Whatever name we may give to those who form an association, and whatever the reason of the association may be, they will soon degenerate into secret societies. It is better policy, therefore, to provide devices for mastering conflagrations and to encourage properly owners to make use of them, and, if occasion demands, press the crowds into the same service." In some cases, however, the government did have to rely on private contractors to conduct its business. These were the publicani. One of their major activities was to bid for the right to collect taxes in the name of Rome. Winners would seek to reap profits from this endeavor by imposing extra taxes on the people on top of what was owed the government. With the Roman authorities at their back and often hired muscle by their side, these publicani became famously predatory. One particularly greedy publicani is reported by Livy to have not only conducted illegal tax farming, but also set up a scheme of insurance fraud. He describes it as follows, quote, "They would put small cargoes of little value on old, battered vessels, sinking them at sea after taking off the crews in small boats that were in readiness, and then falsely declare that the shipments were far more valuable and collect corresponding repayment." Such powerful, well-connected groups rarely suffered any serious consequences from a Roman government which itself was rife with corrupt members who also took part in many cases in these same practices. This was to the great frustration of the general public. Inevitably, things could boil over. Livy, for instance, recounts how on one occasion the tribunes of the plebs had begun proceedings to impose fines on the publicani. In response, the accused brought in their own thugs to break up the legal assembly. These reportedly isolated the tribunes and drew up battle lines against the people. Apparently, quote, These men were restrained from slaughter only by the forbearance of the magistrates in yielding for the moment to their mad audacity. While we lack the evidence to conclude that such economic gangs were widespread, it's likely that criminal and violent acts were just a part of doing business in the past. After all, this was an age where might made right. Bribery, extortion, and intimidation were all tools of the trade. Just as today, the most successful business magnates were ruthlessly cutthroat, though in the past, this probably applied just as literally as it did metaphorically. Another cutthroat environment could be the world of Roman sports, where gangs certainly existed. The most popular of these activities were gladiator matches and chariot races. They were among the biggest sources of entertainment of the era, with people swarming to attend them from far and wide. Just as today, crowds ran the gauntlet from your casual observer to your super fan. These began to line up behind their favorite athletes and teams. Support could often become fanatical, and deadly brawls or even riots are commonly reported. This was often driven by sports hooligans, which used team support as the basis for taking part in disruptive and unlawful behavior. This might be directed towards rival fans and athletes. Attacks took the form of verbal assaults, magical curses, and outright violence. To a certain extent, we might call these types of hooligans sports gangs. However, this title is better ascribed to the factions which arose around the chariot races. By tradition, there were 4 main teams: the Reds, the Whites, the Blues, and the Greens. Each faction had not only its dedicated fans, but also an actual organization which supported it. Generally speaking, they helped fund the races, managed the teams, dealt with the logistics, and provided security for its members. Given the enormous amounts of money in these sports, they likely also had a hand in things like gambling, match rigging, and black market ticket sales. At the head of each faction was typically a patron or group of patrons. The senior managers, known as the Domini Factionum, came next, followed by a hierarchy which would have involved managers, talent scouts, recruiters, athletes, trainers, stable masters, promoters, bookies, musclemen, and more. Such organizations were certainly powerful and had the potential to cause a lot of mischief. However, it seems that for the most part, they were tolerated by the government. In fact, the emperors eventually began supporting factions and picking sides. Thus, with some level of co-option occurring in the light of day, it was a palatable situation. But there were certainly cases where things could blow up, as would occur infamously with the Nika riots that nearly saw the emperor killed and left tens of thousands dead. The last type of gang I wanted to mention was the military gang. However, we won't spend too long on this topic, as the lines really start to get blurry here when it comes to using this term. For instance, there were all kinds of groups across antiquity, which today would be said to exhibit gang-like behavior, but in the past were best described as bandits, pirates, rebels, raiders, and more. Furthermore, what classifies as an official army, as opposed to an unofficial armed organization attempting to exert its will through force, is not really clear. For instance, Roman armies which lost proper discipline were said to devolve into bands of roving bandits. Even when properly controlled, one could argue that armies, loyal to individual generals and beholden to their favor, were just giant gangs. Taken to an extreme, we might even argue that the line between what is an official versus unofficial power merely relies on which one currently has the most power to put the crown on its own head. Just some food for thought. Anyways, I hope that our coverage of this topic so far has been both interesting and entertaining. Let me know what topics you would like to see us cover next. For now, you can head on over to our Patreon to participate in polls, catch script previews, and get HD downloads of all our art. We owe a huge debt to our current patrons for funding the channel, and to our researchers, writers, and artists for making this episode possible. We couldn't have done it without this team and this community. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out these other related episodes. See you in the next one.